So I'm back, and I'm not 100% certain what transpired, but I noticed my mic was making some weird noises, and I just reset my computer. So, as I was telling my story, I'll have to. You'll have to go back and watch the first part if you're just joining after this portion. But where I was cut off was basically discussing exactly what I witnessed was a full-blown manifestation of my mother. And I love my mother dearly, and I don't blame her for it, but it shows me how powerful our thoughts are. When we believe something so strongly, when we want to control things that are totally out of our control so strongly, the resistance can also draw it just as much to you as much as the focus to the excitement of wanting to do something. And so in the case of my mom, I don't know to this day what exactly transpired in her childhood, that she felt she needed to constantly tell us how she never wanted what happened to us children to happen, what happened to her as a child to happen to us children. But I do know sincerely she wanted to protect us, as most parents do. They want to protect us. They don't want us to experience the worst things that they have experienced themselves. And it's natural for any of us. We hate to see anything happen to someone we love, especially if we've been through an experience. We want to step in and say, no, don't do that. I know what happened to me. I don't want it to happen to you. But we can't control our loved ones or what happens to them in every single moment of time. We can be there to support them. We can be there to offer advice when they ask for it and are willing and accepting it to allow it to them. But never force it, because that will also create the resistance. Because even I wouldn't have, I don't remember being told we couldn't talk to strangers. We were we were children that went around, and we were vibrant and lively, and we trusted everybody. And really, children do that because it's their nature, trust and love. But from that point on, it became a question of trust, who, and then support, where, and then love. Am I worthy? Because as an older child, I saw the situation, and I felt responsible that I allowed it to happen, that I even saw it happen, and that I didn't step in. But at that age, how was I possibly responsible? And sometimes it takes growing up to be an adult to go, wow, there's nothing I could have ever done except for that maybe I could have, I don't know. But what I can do now is to recognize I was innocent, and things happen sometimes, but they also show us how to have compassion for others when we learn to have that compassion for ourselves. Because everything has to start with self. You can't extend the offering of help to others if you're not actually applying it to yourself. And so watching my parents fall apart, watching them argue relentlessly, caused the separation and the divide there, and they both went in different directions. There was a lot of destructive behavior I witnessed, of which I also lived. As a result of an unstable environment with two parents who didn't know how to handle the circumstances, my own father didn't even know how to approach us kids, because at that point, the environment of these investigators started looking into how my parents behaved, which didn't help the circumstances of the situation, because then my father almost felt like he couldn't even touch us as he did before, because now there's scrutiny on him. And he didn't know how to trust himself enough to recognize that it didn't matter what that was all about, that we all needed to come together. And my mother she was on the rampage. It was all about not allowing these people to get away with it. And so the way that things unfolded, and I'll never forget, going back to, in a small town, gossip ensues. And it's the last thing a child needs, is to feel ostracized from their friends, from people. Gossip, as children, we didn't really know. We just felt like, well, this is a small class that I was in, and my friends were all invited to a birthday party, and I wasn't invited to the birthday party. And I wanted to find people to relate to, but their parents weren't allowing it, as if I was bad. So that increased the amount of shame I felt as a child. These are all things that we don't consider, because the ignorance of a parent to think that a child that has been abused could indirectly poorly influence their child doesn't make sense. If anything, you embrace that child and bring them into your loving space and show them that they are worthy and that their innocence is appreciated, honored, and nourish them with love. But again, we go back to it. It all depends on the conditioning and the surroundings and what everybody has different experiences. But it shows the ignorance in culture and people to think that a child should be avoided after they're the ones that were victimized. So that was a tough one for me growing up, because there were people in my school, and some may even see this video, that might have been aware something happened because parents talk. I have no idea what they said. I have no idea what they think they knew. What I do know was that when the police showed up to give us subpoenas, because, children, minors don't have any rights, my mother made a point to take us on a long car ride, and we went out to Arizona. First we went to Missouri. We did all this driving around, and sometimes my mother would just stick us in the car and we'd go someplace without telling us, but I want to say goodbye to Dad. Yeah, you can talk to him later. There was some really weird stuff, things that you go, okay, that's just weird. But as children, we're kind of like, okay. And my dad stayed at the store. I also want to point out, all of a sudden now, the family has this scarlet letter. My dad had the best subs in the town, had the best pizza, and now all of a sudden nobody's coming to the restaurant. As if what happened to us had any bearing on his business. But that's the ignorance of people. That's where people are stuck in these old patterns of thinking, gossip, I gotta play into it. I don't want to go in there. That's a bad place. It wasn't a bad place. It's not even the place it happened, and it wasn't the people that did it. If anything, you avoid the people who created the situation, not the family and the children. So this is just what I experienced. And so we went out, I will never forget this, we went out to an Eckankar seminar, because at that time I remember my mom was reading and involved with Eckankar, which some people might know about. And over the years, I went to Awana, all these different religious gatherings, because I was looking for somebody to reach out to. But my true innocent child always had my own personal relationship and connection with God. So I never felt like I was, even during the circumstances, I would cry and I would pray, please God, make me special. Because at the time I felt so much shame, I no longer felt special. And again, children need to know they're special. And especially if they go through something so traumatic, they need to be embraced and loved and supported. Because when they don't, then they question their worth, and their esteem becomes an issue, and they grow up to be unhealthy adults. And then we have to figure out how to fix ourselves, right? So, my mother never told us what happened growing up. But for years, and even to this day, oh, I have so much to tell you girls. I have so much to share. And it's all about the truth, seeking the truth. But the unfortunate thing with my mother is that what she didn't recognize is the truth is within us. And it doesn't matter what anybody ever tells you. You only know your personal experience. Nobody can tell you, well, this is what I experienced, and that's not going to fix your situation. Like, we all, three girls, had the same, we were at the same place at the same time, but each of us had a totally different experience. And each of us grew into be different people as a result of what stuck and what was difficult to overcome, and whether we have overcome them. So to this day, I look back on my past, and I know that when I was younger, for a good portion up until my early 20s, I really was resentful to my sister Lita, because I felt like she was the reason that we even ended up there. I was mad at her, but I was also mad at myself, because as the oldest sister, I was unable to control the situation, or to stop it, or to fix it, or to keep my parents together, because as an older child, I really wanted my parents to stay together. I felt like them separating and divorcing was also traumatic, because in my mind I had this old conditioning of your parents are supposed to stay together or it reflects poorly upon you. Don't ask me why us as children believe that or even come up with these ideas, but it's old social conditioning. And the legacy torch gets passed until we stop it. We have to stop it with ourselves so that the future generations are not reliving all of this crap. The more love we pour into our own self-healing, the more we're able to radiate it out and uplift others. There's plenty of love to go around, nothing to do with this person hurt me or that person hurt me. Holding on to negativity and anything resentful is unhealthy physically as well as emotionally and mentally. You really need to tap in to your inner child. All of us do. Because there's always some little bit that you're feeling neglected and want to be seen and heard. The inner child just simply wants to be seen, heard, and recognized, acknowledged, embraced, honored, and to know you've got its back. Sometimes I do that. I lay in bed at night and I say, I've got your back. We got this covered. It's okay. Everything's going to be all right. But I didn't come here overnight. It took a lot of deep soul searching after years of destructive behaviors, patterns, belief systems, ideologies. Wanted to grow up, get my degree, buy a house, maybe get married and have some children, because the white picket fence syndrome is really rampant, especially with all those Disney movies of Prince Charming and what have you. I do believe in divine union. I do. And so therefore, I have no problem waiting, because I know I've had love in my life. And I know love conquers all. And especially with the coupling and a divine union of two people who are truly embraced of each other and themselves, oh my gosh, you can move mountains. Haven't you seen couples in love that you just admire and you know they've got each other's back? There's no question of fidelity. There's no question of loyalty. And they're perfectly balanced because they can each do what the other one needs to do without being attached and dependent upon the other. So over the years of my life, as a result of what transpired, I was constantly looking for people to connect with, people to share my story with, but I didn't know how to do it. And so sometimes it was just looking and searching for someone who could understand me, and so I could be seen and heard, because I felt like I was ashamed to be around anyone. Even though, if you knew me growing up, yes, I have a very social personality. I can get along in different environments. Of course, I moved around a lot. So I like a chameleon, adapting to your environment. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. The longer you stay stuck in a situation, the longer and the harder it is to get out of the routine. That's why it's so important to change things up once in a while. Often, every day. It's good. It's also good for the brain. It's good for rewiring the neurons, you know? It's like this balance of routine and also change. We have to evolve and grow, and sometimes the routine has to include something with a change up, something to spark new wiring, new neurons, create new growth. So quite often what happens with children who have been abused and have no self-esteem and self-worth is they look for love in all the wrong places, right? Who out there has been there? Compromising their bodies, their integrity, hanging out with people who you go along to get along, drinking. Fortunately, drugs, no, because I went into the Air Force. But see, here's the thing, as a strong-willed individual as I am, some of this was unconscious, but a good portion of my life was also very much focused, and I had goals. So I looked upon my future as, I'm not getting married unless I have someone who I feel will complement. And I really had this idea that when I found the right person, I would get married. And a lot of times I was kind of going through motions throughout my life, up until into my 30s, where I was in relationships and I was already kind of looking ahead like, so where's this going? Is this something potential, to be married and have children with this individual? After I'd been with them for a while, and after I felt like I'd like to have children with this person. But I never put myself in a situation where I would want to lock the person in. I didn't want to have children. Thank you, Heidi. I didn't want to have children with somebody who I didn't feel was stable enough. But I also wasn't going to just try to, I'm sorry, but there are women out there. Sometimes they think if I get pregnant, the person will stay with me. And I watched all those kinds of behaviors and patterns, and it wasn't for me. It wasn't who I was. The last thing I wanted was to be pregnant by somebody I would have to stay connected to for the remainder of that child's life if we weren't in a perfect accord with one another. And after seeing my parents, the last thing I wanted was that. I never wanted to be in an argumentative relationship. But for a good portion of my life, again, I go back to thinking that my parents exemplified passion and love because they argued, and it fueled them. And sometimes we'll say, oh, well, they're Italian, oh, they're Irish, oh, there's this, like we actually put them in a box as if that defines who they are, and it's not who they are based on the cultural ideas. Italians are loud and boisterous, the Latin blood, it's all passion, arguing, blah, 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 raising your voice. Well, in my family, they raised the voice a lot because one wanted to be heard and the other one had to speak up over the other. And that's unhealthy. If you can't have a conversation without raising your voice, trust me, I was in relationships where it was pointed out to me, you raised your voice, and I'm like, no, I didn't. Of course I couldn't see it. I wasn't looking at myself. And it's easier for other people to see your behavior because they're not you, right? So, I mean, I went into relationships that were not so great for me, and there was some promiscuity over the years, but I was also the type of person who really wanted to be in a one-person relationship, so I was never a serial dater. It feels like too much to juggle to have more than one person in your life. That could just be me. Yeah, I tell you what, it didn't happen overnight, but healing really takes deep work. And it's confronting areas of your life you may not want to go there. You don't have to go there today. But I'm telling you, the most cathartic ways that I've healed have been writing it down in a journal, because there's something freeing with the hand. Sometimes it's speaking it out, telling the story, but not telling the story to relive it, and not telling the story to gain a connection with somebody else, but to release it and rewrite it. I'm sharing this story because I want to inspire those of you who may not have confronted your own personal pains and traumas and sufferings whenever in your life. Because those younger years are the most impressionable. Bruce Lipton says in his book, the Jesuits said, give me a child up to the age of 6 and we'll make a devout. Because the conditioning of a child up until the age of 6 is so impactful. Those are the most pivotal years that the child will carry through with their belief systems, their experiences, everything. It's like that is the foundation, the first 6 years at the minimum. And when we experience traumas at those ages, it really shifts around in our brain. Amygdala, the traumas are stored in there. And when we are re-triggered throughout the course of our lives, it turns on switches. Maybe you're desensitized as a result of some of the traumas because it was so numbing. And that's what ends up happening, is we're not living our lives fully because we've been numbed down. Not just dumbed down, because we got plenty of media to do that with propaganda. And the fluoride in our water and all the foods that have, chemicals. That's why it's so important to honor your temple, your body, mind, and soul. To recognize you are pure love. That's all we are. Life isn't happening to us. It's responding to us. So when you recognize what you've been through and you see the patterns, it's like, oh, now I get it. I understand. I was a victim in my childhood, and therefore I grew up on the defense constantly. This was me. Constantly looking to defend myself and living a victim life. So what did I do? I drew attention to the victim in me. And sometimes, often, and I want to share this with the ladies because I know we're not the only ones, there would be times I would go out with friends and I would drink too much. And again, the shame would come back up because the morning after, you wake up next to someone and you go, oh my gosh, we didn't, did we? You don't remember much, if you remember anything at all. But what you do realize is you're ashamed because you didn't have control over the situation. Because here you are with somebody you may not have ever considered. You have now compromised your body, again. The spirits from the alcohol, not necessarily the best way to inspire you, if anything, right? And that happened on more than one occasion. And it just enhanced, again, the shame that I felt as a child was just being carried through my destructive behavior. And of course, going back to my strong will, there were times where I'm like, I swore off alcohol for months. I didn't touch alcohol because I saw what I did. I was so embarrassed. Or I drank so much I was so sick the next morning. Oh, there were several times I had alcohol poisoning. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you it was pretty. It was ugly. And I even remember one time when I was stationed in Korea and a bunch of us had gone out drinking. And there was this guy, and he kind of liked me and my other girlfriend. And we all drank too much. I don't even remember how it ended up transpiring. And I was involved with somebody else at the time. And somehow I brought this individual back to my room, my dormitory room. And the person I was seeing at the time showed up and did not intervene. And we later had a conversation about how I said, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you say something? I was really drunk because I woke up that next morning really, again, ashamed and embarrassed that I allowed that to happen. So we don't call it rape because we didn't call it that because you felt so bad. Your self-worth and self-esteem are already low. The last thing you're going to say is I was taken advantage of while I was drunk. And that's where the whole situation with women drinking, when men take advantage, never take advantage of a woman when she's drinking. I don't care what she said, yes, she was up for it, whatever, no. Even if the woman says, yes, she wants this, she's inebriated. She's intoxicated. It's not a healthy situation. And it's definitely not honoring her, let alone yourself. And that's an energy you don't want to carry through your life. And I know there's plenty of men out there that look back and they're really embarrassed that they did that. That they put themselves in situations where they know they shouldn't have done what they did. So my friend, the person I was seeing at the time, turned around and actually said to me, well, I thought you wanted it. I said, actually, I would have never done that, but I was really, really drunk. And that person really felt bad because they realized they had pointed out they had intervened another time where that individual had gone back with another friend and he stopped it from happening. So when he showed up at my door and he didn't step in thinking I wanted it, now here he feels even guiltier because he realized I might not have wanted it. Hello? He was mad at me. That was what his reaction was, but at least he showed up to talk to me about it. And he went through his own destructive stuff. He shaved his hair and did some weird stuff. But I looked at him, I said, listen. I said, no, I would have never done that. And I wish you had stepped in because that's what I needed at that moment. So when we look back at our past behaviors and patterns, it tells us all about where we're at now. Because every choice we've made along the way has led us to where we are in this moment. And going back to your childhood and healing, that is the most important. Be good with it. You have to embrace it. It happened. Whatever it was. It's not going to happen overnight. I don't expect anybody who ever goes through something so traumatic, any type of abuse, anything, whether it's sexual or physical beating or it's verbal abuse, it doesn't matter because what matters is the impact it made upon your young psyche at the time and your sense of worth and self-love and compassion for yourself. Because we can never know what we say to somebody and how it stays with them all their lives. That's why it's so important to have a high vibration. We have to consider every word we think and speak, every action we take, and it to be in our highest good, to be our highest self. to embrace and be what we came here to be, pure love, not to withhold it because they didn't prove themselves, because I felt like I was constantly having to prove it, and there was no need to, because I just was who I was, and there was nothing wrong with me. Over the years, and when I go back to living in the house we had in Maine, we moved around a little bit. My mother brought us back down to Newburyport, Massachusetts for a short time. But I always felt like I wanted to be with my dad too, and it was hard. Because, in the other hand, I really felt like I wanted to protect my dad. And I can't explain why my dad would ever need my protection, but as a child, I felt like I needed to protect him and to be there for him. So I ended up going back to live with my dad, and my sister stayed with my mom for a while. And there was a lot of moving around. My dad eventually decided to go back to school, and he moved to Florida with my grandmother, and he went back to school. And then we were in Maine again with my mom, and at that time my mom also started dating a truck driver, Jim, who was a beautiful man, and probably one of the most helpful, stable men that entered my life, even though I despised him. But only because of my ideology that I wanted my parents to stick together. This idea that they needed to be together to make me whole, to make me feel good about myself. Because them separating and divorcing made me feel like it was my fault and I wasn't good enough. So when I moved back to Maine, and there was a lot of praying. I mean, I was praying every night. And the friends that I had, it was a different life. It wasn't probably the life that we would have had things not happened the way they did. But I look back and I see how much I tried to fit in even through schools. I went to 3 different high schools. So I had exposure to all these different schools. So we had moved back to Florida and then eventually moved to New York, where my dad ended up taking a job. But again, I didn't have a problem with the fitting in and then moving around, because then I was actually exposed to new people who didn't know my story. But whenever going back to Maine, there was the lingering cloud, you know? Yeah. Hey, Artie. So, Artie, I don't know if you saw the first part, but growing up, I was telling the story in the first part of this video about what transpired with us children. And there was a pedophile involved in Holton. And what's interesting going back to this story is my sister and I have talked about curiosity of what transpired and what happened to the individual. I'm not going to say the name. It's not necessary. But we both admitted to looking up online for this individual to see where they were. And last I heard, he's back in Maine, back in Holton. And one thing, I don't need to see the person, but I've made peace with it and forgiven myself especially. But I also recognize that pedophilia doesn't just start with the individual. It had to have happened over the course of the legacy of that person's family. And I can only think that, gosh, what was it that happened to that individual that they had such a fixation on wanting to do the same to others? So what I was saying, Artie, is that ultimately, as a result of what transpired, my dad's pizzeria business, which was amazing, and everybody always told me how much they loved his pizzas and his sub shops, was pretty much branded with the scarlet letter as a result of what transpired to us kids. And there was lots of gossip. And I don't even know what the story was, which is totally irrelevant at this time. But it left a deep impact on all 3 of us, and feeling like outsiders. You know, when you're growing up with a bunch of kids and they're not really inviting you to their birthday parties, and Artie, you know, it was a small town, small environment, Hodgson and Holton. Not a lot of kids in school. especially when you graduate with like 50 people. And you know, it's funny how you can never know or hear what's the gossip, but you're aware of it. And I was a little bit naive to a lot of stuff that was going on down, down around there. People didn't always tell me everything. Or if I found out after everybody had been talking about it and it was old news at that point. I remember when I was in 7th grade maybe, and we used to write letters. Remember everybody used to pass notes in school? And Tracy Mitchell was my best friend, and I liked Sam Ivy. And they were just creating a little story on paper. It was not true, but it was made up like me and Sam. The story went along like me and Sam were married and we were going to have a baby. And because this was written on paper and the teachers got a hold of it, and then it got to the principal, and then parents were called. I didn't find out until my mother told me later. She said, "Oh yeah, I heard from Tracy's mother about it." I'm like going, that's just crazy. And it was totally harmless. It was just stories made up on paper. I mean, I don't even remember when I had my first kiss. I don't even remember who that was. But, yeah, and moving around different high schools, as a result of the different type of school systems that I went to, Maine had a different set, like honor systems, advanced honors or something, and then Florida had the honor system, but New York had the Regent system. I mean, they were completely all three different. And the only reason I ever even went back to Maine for my senior year, because otherwise I would have stayed with my dad in New York, was because of the system. And because if I had stayed with Dad, I would have had to stay back a year in high school. And nobody wants to stay longer in school than they have to. Not only that, it's embarrassing. It makes you feel stupid because you couldn't pass enough of the courses. But all it was the transferring of the different courses, and the fact that I went through a really difficult period in my junior year in high school, where I was suicidal. Yeah. Yeah, my friend Tyler, who I loved really deeply, had killed himself. And the only reason I didn't know right away or talk to him was because I was grounded from the phone, which was one of the only times my mother ever grounded me from the phone. And she went out of the house, and I actually picked up the phone and called his line, and his father answered it, and he had a private line. And when I asked, "Well, where's Tyler?" he turned around and said, "Tyler's dead. He won't be living here anymore." And I'm like, okay, another trauma, right? And I went through a period of where I just didn't want to be alive anymore. I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel lovable. I felt abandoned. So, yeah. But all of that, and working on and being at peace with all of it, and recognizing those are experiences to make me a stronger person and to have more compassion for others. I see children and I feel like I remember so deeply what it was like to be a child. I still feel like I can think like they do. Because children are so much more aware than you give them credit. They know how to manipulate, because I was one of them. I know how to manipulate. They're not stupid. Naive to certain circumstances, clearly. I mean, I obviously lived it myself, and watching it through my sister's eyes. But it doesn't make me any less than who I am, or unavailable to all of you. If this video brought you value, I challenge you to share it along with the first one. Share it with those you love, you care about, especially people who have ever been through any child abuse. Parents as well. Because if I could give you parents any advice coming from the mind of a child and what I experienced, no matter whatever happens to your child, always nurture the love, their purity, embrace them, Make them feel that you are there and you've got their back no matter what. I don't care how much you love on them. Love on them as much as you can to the point where they're like, get off of me. It's the most, they'll remember it. And I know some of you have teenagers and you see them. You're on them to the point where they're like, get off of me. You're freaking me out, Mom. Get away from me, Dad. Oh my God. Oh my God. Devon will get that one. But that child, you watch. Look at their face. They say, oh my God. And they're like, they're kind of smiling too at the same time. Because especially during the teenage years, there's one thing I do know. They want you to be there. They don't want you all up in their face because they do need that space and that room to grow. But they do need you. They need to know that no matter what, you're not going to judge them or dislike or dislove them any less, right? You're not going to love them less. Because the more open, free the communication, the embracing, not the reacting, because that's, you know how a child learns how to lie? By the negative reaction of a parent. If a child takes a cookie and you treat it as a bad thing, they're going to lie in the future. No, I didn't take a cookie. But it's those little things that mold them into the person they become and the stories that they carry. So share, invite your friends. Reach out and touch someone, because sharing is caring. And when I'm sharing bits and pieces of me, I'm sharing the best of me. Because in the end, we're all perfect just as we are. We are the whole package, baby. I love you all so much for showing up. And judge me if you want, and judge me if you don't. I love you anyway. Lots of love. Have an amazing Tell It Like It Is Tuesday.